your your canvas stuff will come after that. But it should cycle through at least twice, so everybody gets a chance to look at it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about these three-dimensional installations that you've done?
So it's interesting because I actually started off with 2D and painting, and then my painting turned into collage, and then things started coming off the canvas, and finally I just realized that flat 2D space wasn't quite enough for me, and I started doing 3D pieces, and I'm really thinking a lot about our surroundings, both our natural and constructed environments, and how the time we live in now is different from other points in time. And one of the things that really stands out to me is a lot of the synthetic materials that we're using today, a lot of the architecture and urban planning that we're doing today, how it's very characteristic of the here and now, and then also color. I love color, and I also think that how saturated and vibrant color is really sort of the color scheme of our time. So you look back in the past, in the 70s, have this kind of like funky thing going on, and the 80s are kind of, pow, pizzazz, and 90s, and now here we are. And I think that saturated color, everything's digital and hyper colored and, hyper polished, and we're just inundated with that all the time. And it can be misleading, but it can also be really beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And when you talk about the synthetic materials that you use, I mean, there's like we can see vote and re-elect, and so you use a lot of campaign signage because we know there's no shortage of that around here. How do you acquire that? I picture you and your husband like driving around neighborhoods at night, just like taking signs out of people's yards. Is that what's going on?
We got pulled over by a cop one time, actually.
Did you really? I was joking. I didn't know you were actually doing that. Okay, so tell this story.
No, I usually wait till right after Election Day because I don't want to rob anybody of their advertising. They pay to make them and put them out there. And I never take signs from people's yards because that's their own personal statement, so I don't touch that. But in public places and street medians, and a lot of times getting on and off the freeway, and so there will be times when the day after we'll drive, wherever. I'll scope out areas where there's a ton of them, especially the ones with really pretty colors. And my husband will drop me off at one end of the street, and I'll just walk down the median and pick him up, and then hop in the car at the other end of the street. And there was one evening, it was already dark. We kind of drove out to Mercer. There was this whole, right as you got off the freeway, there were a ton of them. And I never know what people are going to think. I mean, I don't think there's anything illegal with, the campaigns are actually supposed to remove them afterwards themselves, so I'm kind of doing a service, a cleanup service.
They do a pretty poor job of that, let's be honest.
And a lot of times they don't. They just kind of hang out there. But I always think it looks a little odd that, this, short little person is, out there kind of just rummaging through the bushes with like all these crazy signs. So I'm always kind of discreet about it. But yeah, we went one evening, it was kind of late, and we piled up the car, and then we were driving back over the bridge, and apparently we were driving too slow. And so we got pulled over, because it's pretty late. And when we got pulled over, the first thing I said is, I was like, do you think they stopped us because of the signs? I was like, no, I don't think so.
Right.
And it was no big deal. She just checked to make sure that we weren't drunk, and we were there in our PJs and sweatpants, and we were like, we have not been partying, and
so styling,
totally. So it was no big deal. And then the other place I get some of those signs is there's one shop in town that kind of prints for all the different campaigns, and they have misprints.
Oh,
and once these signs are printed, there's nothing else that they can do with them, and the misprints never even get used, not once, and they're not recyclable because of the printing process that's used to get that ink to be weather resistant.
When did how did you come up with that idea to use that? I mean, it's smart, and I always wonder where all those end up.
Yeah.
There's a shrine somewhere to re-elect Mayor so-and-so. So it's good that they're actually being put to use.
Some of the candidates actually will reuse their signs, which I think is really awesome. If they know they're going to run again, they'll save them and they'll reuse them, which, big props to that. But it was kind of an aha moment for me. I was already painting, then I was using found advertising, and I also had some family friends in the advertising business who would give me again their extras and their test prints, and I was already collaging and using that. And then I started getting 3D, and I started attaching advertisements to plastic, and then I wanted to be able to do stuff outside, and it was kind of this aha moment where I thought, oh, signs are already plastic, already have ads, and they're weather, they're good for outdoor weather, and, they can take the rain and whatnot. So it was just this obvious next step. And then I also use vinyl adhesive, like giant stickers and all these kind of advertising materials, which again then reference back to advertising and all these kind of contemporary practices and sort of our visual landscape.
Right, because that's now that they're seeing some of the 2D stuff that you've done. I mean, there is always an incorporation with modern and natural. Mm-hmm. And I mean, why is it? Okay, and I love all that. There's so much circular stuff, which I love, is pretty consistent in your 2D stuff. I mean, is there a reason for that? I mean, other than I just feel like a circle's safe. That's me. I love the safety of a circle.
Yeah, it kind of came out of a couple different things. I think because my 2D imagery, there's a lot of architecture, which is very sort of detail-oriented and specific, mm-hmm. that the backgrounds, I could just kind of be fun and loose and fluid and bubbles and watercolor and, you know, it kind of gives this sense of atmosphere. But I also like it because it's very ephemeral. It's this idea that, you know, these landscapes are changing or in the midst of changing or about to change, and they're really fluid. And I like thinking about our living environments, and, you know, buildings seem so permanent, but they're really not, and the city is changing all the time. So in both my 2D and 3D work, I always want to have a sense of change and movement and, you know, kind of reflect that.
In the information that you sent me, I was reading about how, like, with your outdoor installations, and the one that came to mind as I was reading it was the one where everything's climbing up the tree.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how one of the things that is really important to you is that not only does it represent what could be growing into something else, but also the deconstruction of it.
Yeah.
Have you ever had, like, how do you feel when you take it apart? Because I know, like, putting it together is obviously a wonderful, you're creating this thing, but do you get kind of, because that's so important with your work, do you get a similar satisfaction when you do tear it back down?
It's interesting because when these installations, they take forever to build and it takes a lot of effort to put them up, and then they come down like that. They come down so fast. And that's really telling too, you know, these things that we take so long to build and put so much passion and, you know, motivation, and it takes so much out of us to make them, and then they come down and disappear overnight, you know. And so there's something kind of sad about that, you know, but it comes full circle. But what I love is that they become something else. I always reuse my pieces and I kind of deconstruct them and rebuild them. And these materials are ephemeral in a way too. Again, when they're up, they look, you know, they're strong, they're sturdy. I always have to think about public safety, especially with the outdoor pieces. But these types of plastics don't last forever. I mean, there's a point at which each piece will sort of die, and, you know, and I won't be able to use it anymore, and it'll get phased out. But there's always new pieces or offshoots of those pieces, you know, getting built for each project I do. I change them or I add to them, and so they do have a life. And I think that's one of the things that's so attractive to me about them, is that they're totally synthetic, man-made materials, but I'm also kind of thinking about these as like living entities, and there is this sort of almost like sci-fi factor to it, like these. I always think about crystals, which is a rock. Absolutely. It's not alive per se, but they do grow over time. And so that's how I think of my artwork, is that it's not alive exactly, but they do kind of take on a life of their own and kind of grow potentially out of control, which they're beautiful, but if they were to overtake the planet, that would be really scary. And I think that's sort of also a metaphor for these materials. You know, plastics and things can be very convenient and handy and helpful, and we use them for everything, but they're kind of like taking over, you know, and there's a downside to that too, you know, all of the waste and, you know, and trying to think about plastic, which is something disposable and cheap, and, you know, and trying to think of it as something that could be potentially beautiful and valuable, so that maybe I'm thinking about the materials in a different way too, and I think, you know, in general as a society, we're starting to think about these questions and coming up with some answers. You know, I think about how we're phasing out plastic bags at the grocery store. That's the same kind of thinking, you know, for a long time, no one ever thought twice about what happens to a plastic bag after you use it at the grocery store. And now we're starting to think about that and coming up with answers. And I guess my artwork is also trying to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah. The piece that we just passed, which was the one at Westlake Center, how did that even come about? Because, I mean, that's obviously like tremendously prominent area.
Yeah.
And that had to have been incredibly, I mean, like, holy crap, you have an exhibit in the middle of Seattle.
Yeah.
Just right there for everybody. How did that happen? Thank you, Jeff.
It was a project opportunity that was posted to the general public, and I applied for it and submitted a proposal. And that's one of the things I love about public art, is that it's a very democratic process. You put your work out there, you put your idea out there. It's a different group of people in the room looking at the work each time, and and they really kind of gave me that opportunity to use that amazing space in the heart of the city.
Right.
And not only that, but they sort of picked me based on my portfolio, and they saw my potential, and I kind of submitted a proposal to do something in the trees, and they said, well, it's the summertime, the trees will have leaves. Why don't you rethink this space? And I went out there, and that arch, it's huge.
Yeah.
But I've walked through that plaza a million times and never really noticed the scale or the weight of it. It kind of just blends in. And so when I revisited this space, again, it was just this obvious thing that just for some reason hadn't hit me yet. Right. And as soon as I saw it, I realized I have to do something on that arch. Yeah. And the way that project evolved was really good, because if someone had told me, the day I submitted the proposal, if someone had told me I was going to do a piece that was 20 feet by 24 feet, and I was going to be in a 30-foot boom lift for 2 days straight installing, and and it was going to take me, constructing that thing, it was 21 sections, and then we put them up onto a wood frame. If someone had told me that was what I was getting myself into, I would have thought you were crazy. But it was one of those things where I kept saying yes, and the next thing I knew, I'm up in that boom lift, and I'm putting those pieces on, and there was definitely this amazing moment after we installed it where I took a step back and thought, whoa, I made that. Yeah. That came from me. Yeah. It was just this idea in my head. I constructed it by hand. Mm-hmm. I hired a professional installer, and the two of us installed the whole thing, the two of us, for 2 days.
It looks the happiest I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
It's really, really incredible.
It was physically really taxing, and it was a very short time frame for the scale, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and it was also one of the coolest things I've ever done.
How long did it stay up there?
It was up through the summer. They actually extended it. And then when it came down, all the people at the park said, what happened? I thought we got to keep that.
Right.
I said,
it's fantastic. And it is, you talk about the vibrant colors. It is just this amazing pop in the middle of, all the other things that usually happen at Westlake Center.
Center. That's the first thing most people say about that piece is, wow, that pop of color. And I always think it's really interesting because people in the Northwest like their grays and their browns, but every time I do a project, people are instantly attracted to the color, and I think, right. you want the color. You don't know it yet, but I will show you. You want the color.
Yeah. Well, and with the other ones that you've done, I guess I'd never really thought so much about the campaign signage and how pretty it really is. Yeah. But when you break it down, I don't have to read all the crap people are saying and all their silly little names, which I love politics. Yeah. Can I tell? I do love America, as we've already determined. They do take on a whole new life, and that just makes me want candy. So that was a bad one for me to be looking at late at night, in a good way, because I have a sweet tooth. So.
I also like the metaphor of a Jolly Rancher.
A Jolly Rancher, totally.
It's really pretty, and the surface texture is really shiny and luscious.
You want to unwrap it.
Attractive, but too many Jolly Ranchers is bad for you. So again, it's that push and pull between. It's like pleasure and beauty, but also maybe a warning in there somewhere, or a thoughtfulness to make you kind of question this sort of unnaturalness of it all. So
this, so you've done. Obviously pieces in downtown Seattle and in various parks, and then you also did a piece in Joshua Tree.
Yes.
So, as an artist, how are you finding these projects to be a part of? Is it hard?
Yeah. In the beginning, it felt like I spent a lot of time kind of scrounging for opportunities, and once you kind of figure out where to look for them, there are things all the time. And it's just a matter of, in the art world, I'm sure it's similar for music and comedy and everything. There's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of no's before you get a yes. Mm-hmm. But once you get into the process, and I'm constantly applying for things, I'm constantly applying for grants, but what's cool is once you do a few and you kind of start meeting people, and everyone I've worked with in doing public art has been amazing. All the installers, the people at the city, the people funding these projects. It's a really neat sort of subculture of the art world, I'd say, or like its own niche. But yeah, there's a lot out there, and now I kind of get invited to apply to things, which that was amazing. The first time someone emailed me through my website and said, we've seen your work, we'd like for you to apply for this, and I just thought, whoa,
you know who I am.
No, they looked at my website. They found me, I'm out there, and so, because for me, I just felt like such an outsider, and I'm just kind of doing my thing, and, crazy public art like this is sort of, it's its own little kind of niche, and I just kind of felt like I was, out on the fringe of the art world in Seattle, and so to feel like, wow, people are noticing what I'm just doing my thing, and I'm putting it out there, and people are noticing, and they're liking it, and they're into it, and they're asking for more, and
that's the best way, no matter what your pursuit is. Is just do what feels right to you, wherever you're, you know what feels good. And you do go through that process where it's just you appreciating it, and you don't really know if anybody else does get it or if they like it. You get a lot of smiles,
or think I'm crazy.
Oh yeah, that was really good. That was really good. And you're like, really? Was it? So yeah, definitely when people are coming to you, then you know you've done well for yourself.
I'm like I'm on to something here. It's a conversation people are interested in. It's an aesthetic people are liking and responding to, and
it's unique to you. So I feel like I could walk through anywhere America, and if you had an installation, I feel like I would have a pretty good idea that was probably your work, which is a pretty significant accomplishment. So you should be really proud of yourself.
Thank you. Hey, I'm gonna blush.
Oh, blush! Do it. So before we let you go, where can people find out more about you for what you have going on now, what you're going to be doing in the future? What's the best way to keep track of you?
Yes, well, I have my website, which unfortunately is usually a lot more updated after the fact, which I apologize. I'm always trying to stay on top of that, but it gets bumped to the end of the list. But so my website is a really great place. I promise I will be updating it in the next couple weeks because I have projects coming up this summer. And then I have a Facebook page. You can either find it through Elizabeth Gahan or ERG Fine Art and Design. And I really that's where I try to keep it up to date. And so I'm going to have large-scale temporary artwork up for the Bellevue Art Museum Fair at the end of July. And then I'm going to have a big installation up for the Burien Arts Aglow in September. I'm going to have some 2D paintings in a group show at the Sam Gallery in September.
Nice.
And at some point this year, I'm having a piece going up in Tacoma.
Nice.
I don't know when yet.
So. That's good. You're spread out. That's fantastic.
Yeah, so off the top of my head. And then I have little things here and there. I'm doing like a little afternoon family workshop through the Henry this summer, and a panel discussion through Tacoma Festival and Art Museum. So
sweet.
Yeah, so I'm always kind of doing something.
I believe it. I mean, I just want to let you know that this is the longest, most intensive slideshow I've ever put together for Sessions with She. I was like, holy crap, how many slides do I have? There's like 63 slides or something in your slideshow, which is way the hell more than anybody else has had. So very impressive stuff. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much.
You guys give it up for Elizabeth Gahan, you guys.